Hey guys, I usually don't discuss personal incidents, but there's always been something on my mind that really typifies where we are as a nation. And in our area here, we have a game night. We get a bunch of people together and we play games. It's not political, it's just a fun thing because people are so isolated now. And Sasha had an old friend she had invited over to game night, and we played with him. Real nice to him. He was kind of left wing, but no big deal. No big deal, right? And then he wrote Sasha an email. It looked like a form letter saying, "Oh, I can't be around this toxic environment with all the bad words." He accuses our side of having, and unless you dump your friends, I can't be friends with you. It was really amazing because, again, we had really no political discussions. We were all nice to him. But just the thought that we could hold a different point of view, he thought he was being evil and he shouldn't even be around us. And it really amazed me of how much that typifies the modern left. Because years ago, when I was in university, it'd be common the idea that you have people on the left and you would debate them, you get really down and dirty, but then you'd be friends afterwards. But now the entire SJW left, social justice warriors, they have become more of really a cult. And that hit home the other day because I was watching a Netflix series they did about Jim Jones. And that happened in the 70s. If you don't know who Jim Jones was, you can look him up. You probably do. He was famous. He was a big cult leader. He was a preacher, a Protestant. He believed in the heresy of word of faith, where you could just speak things into existence. But what was weird, he combined that. He was like a televangelist type, even though I don't think he was on TV, but he had all that charisma. But he combined that with the extreme left. He was a communist. He was a Marxist. And he was one of the early, what we would call social justice warriors. We didn't have that phrase back then, but he was extremely anti-white, the whole bit, anti-colonialism. He was all into that jazz, which was interesting because he himself was white, but he attracted this huge black following. His church is called the People's Temple in San Francisco. And eventually he had enough of San Francisco and he started his commune down in Guyana, and he created a commune called Jonestown where everyone got together. And then things started to go sideways. Some people supposedly wanted to leave. He wouldn't let them go because he would call them traitors. So a congressman went down there to investigate. He was real upset about that. And some people wanted to leave secretly. And before they could leave, he sent gunmen to kill the congressman and some people. And then he freaked out. He said, "Oh, this is all going to end now. They're not going to tolerate this." So he told his followers they all needed to commit suicide. That's where we get the phrase drinking the Kool-Aid, because they drank. It wasn't technically Kool-Aid. It was Flavor Aid, but like Kool-Aid. And little children, everything. It was a sad situation. But that is Jim Jones is just a typical example of the cult mentality that people can get into. And we see this now on the left, where it's gone from a political ideology to more of like a theology. They really have like a religious overtones to it. And there's some signs here that really show that it's a cult that's very similar to Jim Jones. And let me see here. I have four signs. 4 signs that you may be in a cult. The first one is isolation. And with Jim Jones and cults, they do not want you to debate other people. You need to be separate from them. Otherwise, you may get bad ideas. You may need to get corrupted. And in Jim Jones's case, they couldn't be around their family members or other people on the outside. You just had to reinforce the cult's position. And you see this with social justice warriors. This is what really surprised me starting back in, I started to notice this around 2015-16 when there was a big push for censorship and deplatforming. I was strange. I found that strange because I always thought people on the left, they valued open debate, and they may call you mean names and everything, but they want to get out there and debate you. But they're became a notion around that time that no, you shouldn't even talk to such people. You shouldn't give them a platform. You should just avoid them. It really became, again, very cult-like in their isolation. And we still see this to the day where they don't try to debate these points. They just try to shut down with censorship, deplatforming. It started with many things. I think it really started with the whole Holocaust when people question that. Instead of having an open debate about the subject, it was like, nope, we're going to just shut down all discussion about the matter. Whereas usual process is, well, no, you guys are stupid. Here's why you're wrong. But we've gone away from that. And now it's in everything. So there's no debate. It's just shutting down the other side and not listening to them. So that's one thing that you could tell if you're in the cult, when you can't debate others or be around others. You have to be very isolated. And you see this personally with SJWs. They're very feminine in the sense that they don't confront you like, I think you're full of shit. Here's why I think you're full of shit, Ramsey Paul. And they lay out the issues and you can debate them. And then even if they disagree with you, they can say, well, I disagree with you politically, but hey, let's have a beer. Let's still be friends. No, they can't do this. This is their entire identity. They got to consider you like the total evil, and there can be no reconciliation or discussion. And we see this in other areas. For example, with Russia and the neocons, instead of like, hey, let's discuss the issues with Putin, it's like, no, we can't discuss anything with Putin. He's a monster. He's the devil. He's Hitler that wants to take over the world and kill everyone. It's just crazed. And this is why it's been so hard to have like a peace negotiations, or because they refuse to discuss anything with what they consider to be the enemy. And we saw this even with the whole COVID thing. You couldn't question COVID, or you couldn't be around people that had a different opinion, even if they're medical doctors. You notice that's what happened like on YouTube. Even medical doctors were shut down. No one could dispute them. Okay, here's your points. This is how you're wrong. No, just silence you. This is how the left deals with things now. Again, it's a very cult type position. The second thing I noticed is that you cannot question the fundamental premise. And obviously this is true of religion. In Jim Jones' case, he was a prophet from God, he claimed, and you can't question that. And you always have to support him, and no matter what, and his premise of how his worldview is. And they always have a rationalization for everything. And this is what we see with the left. They have their fundamental premises when it comes to, let's say, race. All people are exactly equal. At least all races are. Maybe there's differences among individuals, but all ethnic groups are exactly the same. There's no difference physically or intellectually. No. And if there is any differences, it has to be because of white supremacy. That's the only option they have. And they're starting to do this with sex, like men and women are exactly the same. This is crazy. And anytime women lag behind men, oh, it must be because of the patriarchy. This is how they think. So they have a premise first that, for example, all men or all people are equal, but they never question that. So they build their whole dogma around that. And if their premise is wrong, everything else falls apart. And that's the problem with leftism, is their premise is wrong. And getting back to like the Putin example, they have a premise that Putin is just a crazed madman that attacked Ukraine for no reason. He just got up one day and attacked them because he's evil. That's their premise. And if you have another premise that, well, maybe this is a little bit more complicated, maybe NATO had a hand in this, with their coup, the color coup in 2014, and building up forces in Ukraine and trying to get Ukraine into NATO. You can't even bring that up. Farage in Britain, he just sort of mildly brought that up, and NATO had some responsibility for this war. Oh my God, you can't do that because, see, again, that goes against their fundamental premise that Putin is just a crazed monster, and you can't think in any other terms. And this is how the left now thinks, and just crazy terms that are very black and white. The third thing you could tell if it's a cult is if prophecies fail, and they usually fail, but they always have an excuse of why it fails. For example, the Jim Jones example is a small thing, but he considered himself a prophet of God. And when the congressman was coming down to Guyana to inspect the compound to see if the people were okay, he gave a prophecy. He said God gave him a prophecy that the congressman's plane would fall out of the sky and crash. And that got them all excited. But it didn't happen. The plane didn't fall out of the sky and crash. The congressman showed up. But no one thinks about questioning the leader, like, wait a minute, you're supposed to be a prophet, and we're supposed to believe you, but all your prophecies fail. Maybe you're not a man of God. Maybe you're not a real prophet. Now, you can't say that because you'd be killed. And this is the way you see in the social justice warriors or the left. They make all these predictions that fail, they don't come true, but they never own up to it, they never explain it, they just move on. You see this with the whole climate change agenda. They made all these wild predictions years ago, even before the year 2000, that by now Miami would be underwater, New York City would be underwater because all the ice would melt and everything would flood. And that didn't happen. But there's no accountability. They just continue to make these predictions. And if you doubt their predictions, you're the evil one. You're not a true believer. You're in league with Satan or Hitler. It's nuts. And we saw this with the war in Ukraine. We were told that Russia's weak. They're just a gas station with nukes. They have a fragile economy. We put sanctions on them. Russia's going to implode. There's going to be a color revolution in Russia. And soon we will have a gay pride parade in Moscow. Well, that never happened. And so they make all these predictions that never come true, but they're never held accountable. They keep making these predictions. And that's a problem. That is a huge problem, is if you look at the data and it's not what you predict, you got to ask, well, what the hell happened? But they never go to that point. We saw this with COVID. Things didn't happen as they predicted. Remember Joe Biden, it's going to be a long, cold, and deadly winter. If you don't take the vaccine, you're going to be dead. Well, that didn't happen. So, well, wait a minute. What happened here, Joe? And just, no one ever questions that. In fact, you're not allowed to question failed prophecies. And another aspect of a cult is they have a leader can have no faults. The leader is like a demigod. And we saw this a little bit with like Fauci. You couldn't criticize Fauci because if you criticize Fauci, that's like criticizing science. Fauci is science. It's really a perversion of really what science means, but this is how they made things. This is how they make their leaders as people that are wise, all-knowing, and have no other agenda. And you see this with SJW. They have their left-wing so-called fact-checkers that are biased, and they have bullshit. But, oh, no, you can't go get some fact-checkers. Look at this is what Wikipedia says, so it must be true. I had that all the time. I've seen this in my personal life. When I was on Wikipedia, I think I'm still on there. But at one time, they said I was a big writer on Stormfront. I never wrote on Stormfront my whole life, never. But this was put as fact. And this is how they do it. They just make up stuff, but you can't criticize their experts. Even though their experts will change their minds all the time, you're not supposed to look at that. You're supposed to have blind devotion to the experts. Otherwise, you're a heretic. And obviously, Jim Jones was that way. And finally, they use fear. They don't want you to leave the project or whatever they have. That's one of their greatest fears. Jim Jones, his big fear, what really caused the mass suicide with Jim Jones, is he was implementing a communist system down in Guyana. They had like collective farms and everything. And like every time communism is implemented, it fails because eventually you just have like 20% of people doing all the work. The other 80% are just goofing off. And the 20% eventually get pissed off and they're like, why should I bust my butt to work hard when I don't get the rewards for my labor? So they start to goof off. Or if there's an option, they try to get the hell out of there. And we saw this during the Soviet Union under communism. People would try to defect to the West because they didn't want to stay in that people's paradise because it was a nightmare. They wanted to go somewhere where they would be rewarded. But if you have a communist system, you can't allow that because if you allow people to leave, everything falls apart because the people that leave are the best people, and you're counting on the best people to keep your system afloat, kind of. And the Soviets knew this. This is why they built walls and machine guns to keep people in. And Jim Jones knew this. He couldn't allow people to voluntarily leave his experiment, his commune, because he knew if he did, it would start small. It started as a trickle, but then more and more people would leave his utopia he was creating. And the people that would leave first would be the most capable people, and that would collapse the whole system. Then his whole dream of utopia on Earth would be shown to be a fraud, and he would be a fraud. So the only answer was to everyone kill themselves because he couldn't stand the idea of it all falling apart. He was really willing to destroy everything to keep his vision, his false premise, his prophecy. And we see this today many times where they're so dedicated to their vision, they're willing to destroy the whole world. And you see this with the escalation with Russia. Instead of being reasonable and discussing the issues, no, we can't back down an inch, otherwise it will just show their whole program to be a lie. So it's almost like they want a nuclear holocaust. This is something they're pushing for. They would rather die in a nuclear holocaust than have Ukraine or part of Ukraine be under Russia where there's no LGBTQ parade prides. There's just life's not worth living if that's the case. It's a real cult phenomenon that they have, and they try to use fear, and they use fear even internally in the United States, SJWs, that it's a very feminine, like, we're going to exclude you from our group. We're not going to talk to you unless you toe the line. And this is how they try to keep everyone in line, or will expel you. And this is why they do deplatforming or censorship. This is how they try to intimidate people from questioning the dogma. If you question their dogma, they will do these actions to try to isolate you. But it's interesting, while they're fine with isolating you as an individual, they're scared to death of a group of people creating a competing system, because they understand that everyone would go to the competing system and their system would be shown as a fraud. This is why the whole, let's say, separate countries divide up America, where you have America that's the traditional America that's free, our people, and then you have their woke, anti-white shit-lib America. They would not want that. No, but they'd fight that against tooth and nail, because they understand in such a system, all the good people would come to our side, and their side would devolve into starvation, anarchy, a shithole. They understand that. So they have this weird relationship. They need us to prop them up, but then at the same time, they hate us. So it's weird. We can't get free of these people. And again, that's what happened in Jonestown. Jim Jones couldn't imagine letting people leave his system. So this whole SJWism I've noticed recently is more than just traditional left-wingers like years ago would I debate financially. Let's say you debate, what should we be, a socialist system? Should we have socialized healthcare or whatever? No, it's a whole religious thing they have, like white people evil, Christians evil, fuck the patriarchy. It's a whole thing that they don't allow anyone to question, and they're always angry, and they're trying to shut down people, and they don't allow people to freely associate with other people. And if one of your friends associates with a bad guy that has bad views, you got to excommunicate them. And it's a crazy system, and people shouldn't have to live that way. So guys, don't get into a cult. Talk to you guys later.